Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You'll probably recognize this slide. That's where we ended up at the last lecture portion. We're still talking about word building here, and quick review of what we've covered up to this point. Word building rules number 1 and number 2 are dealing with how we attach a suffix to a combining form. And a combining form is a word root plus the combining vowel. The word root is essentially our noun. The combining vowel makes it a functional unit, and that gives us a combining form. If we look at our first medical term here, if you ignore the suffix, gastro with the slash is the appropriate way to present the combining form for stomach. So word building rules number 1 and 2 deal with, do I need to retain the combining vowel or do I throw it away? And just remember the rules are, if my suffix starts with a consonant, yes, we need the combining vowel. If my suffix starts with a vowel, we do not need the combining vowel. That means that the suffix is bringing its own vowel to the party, and it doesn't need to use the vowel of the host, if you will. So we throw that combining vowel away, as in tonsillitis, because itis starts with an I, and it connects right to tonsil. By the way, itis is going to be probably the most used suffix in this entire course. It means inflammation, so get used to it. You're going to be seeing it a lot. It's going to be in every chapter. We will have multiple forms of inflammation on various things. So the question here, do you need a combining vowel? I'm going to let you work with this slide on your own. You can pause the recording here and just take a look at the slide and determine, these words as you look at them, how and why are we using the combining vowel or not? But it's all based on those word building rules. So the other thing we want to look at is word building rule number 3. I'll flip back for a second. This slide is dealing with only word building rules number 1 or 2. What letter does the suffix start with? Word building rule number 3 is about combining nouns together so that you can make compound words that are meaningful and put various organs or various body parts or procedures into one long word with a suffix at the end that tells you what's happening with it. So the rule is, when you have word roots or combining forms, they're really the same thing if you'll recall. The question is, do I need to use that combining vowel? Please remember, and for word building rule number 3, when combining the nouns, the combining forms, or in this slide, they're calling them the word roots. When you're combining those, you always use the combining vowel of the first word, regardless of what the first letter is of the second word. Look at our first word here, gaster, enter. So gaster, stomach, enters the small intestine. We put the combining vowel between it. Even though enter starts with a vowel, we still use the combining vowel, as you see on the right. The real question on this page is, what do I have to do to attach the suffix? In our first example, gastroenteritis, enter does not need a combining vowel to attach itis because itis brought its own vowel in the form of the letter I to the party. So gastroenteritis, very easy. Same sort of thing with osteochondroma. An osteochondroma is a tumor of a bone and cartilage. You notice between osteo and chondro, there is a combining vowel. There is not a combining vowel between chondr and oma because oma brought its own vowel. Electrocardiograph, here's another compound word. We're combining the word for electricity with heart and then with graph. We always use that combining vowel when we put two nouns together, or word roots or combining forms, whichever form of the noun we're working with. We always use that combining vowel from the first word. So it doesn't matter what the second word starts with. But when we add the suffix, as in graph, we need the combining vowel because graph starts with a consonant. So I don't want to belabor the point, but I do want to make sure that you understand that. Any further clarification, you can send me an email, or if you see this before we have our Zoom meeting on Monday, you can ask me then, and I'm happy to do further clarification for you on this. But those are our word building rules, and those are the only 3 word building rules you're going to need for the entire semester. So learn them, live them, love them, breathe them. They are a life for you right now until you get them as second nature. And quite frankly, I'm hoping that will come very quickly. It usually does. Okay, now our last section here about grammar before we move into actually start learning some prefixes is learning how to define a medical term. When we define medical terms, we break them down from back to front to middle. Now, I told you before I'm a fluent German speaker, and that, well, used to be fluent. It's kind of sketchy now because I don't live in Germany anymore. But it's kind of the way their language works too. You look at the back end of a sentence, and then you go to the front of the sentence, and you go all the way back to where you started, and you put all that together, and that's how you understand it. Midterm works the same way. We're going to look at the back of the word, the front of the word, and then the middle of the word. So here's how that's going to work. You see a word up here that's broken into pieces. You see that the item marked number 2 is a combining form. Number 3 also is a combining form. You're just not seeing the combining vowel. They didn't put it there. And that part labeled number 1 is our suffix. And you will note that the publisher of these slides did not put a hyphen in front of itis, which is a suffix. So if that were on an exam, that would be a wrong answer. But you know better. You know that it needs to have a hyphen in front of it. So when we define medical words, we define the back first. And just a quick word on suffixes, which we're not going to start quite yet. As I said earlier, and I'm pretty sure I said both of these statements earlier, around 30 to 40% of the words will have prefixes. All of them are going to have some form of word root or combining form, at least for right now. That's what I want you to know, that all of them will have some sort of combining form, which is the noun that we're talking about. And every single medical term is going to have a suffix. So you really, really, really need to know your suffixes in order to define words. If you don't learn your suffixes now during chapter 1, you're going to have great difficulty in learning all of the, or being able to define all the words that we learned this semester. So really understand those suffixes when we get to them. Getting back to the slide here, osteoarthritis is our word. We're defining the back first. So you see the number 1 on the left-hand side of the screen. That correlates to the number 1 in parentheses under the word itis. The first thing we do in a definition is define the suffix. In this case, our suffix is itis, which means inflammation. Once again, I don't care if you know what itis means right now. I simply want you to understand the role the suffix plays in how we define the word. So itis is our last word. That means inflammation. So now we have the next line down, the 2. It says define the front. And if we go to the front of this word and we look at the number 2 in parentheses, osteo. So that's the next part we're going to go to. Osteo, which means bone. So far our definition means inflammation of bone. Now there's a third component here because this is a compound word. And we're combining osteo with arthur. Arthur means joint, and that O is going to stay there because we're putting 2 nouns together. Word building rule number 3. So now we define part number 3, which is in the middle here. And that happens to be, once again, Arthur joint. So if you really literally look at it, at the bottom of the page, you see the word, the actual medical term, osteoarthritis. And if you look at that word, I'm going to try to use my mouse here to highlight it. I don't know if you can see this or not. If we see it, we have inflammation. That's our first suffix, or not our first suffix, our only suffix. Inflammation of the bone, osteo, and joint, Arthur. See how that works? Every medical term is going to be defined this way. The first thing you will do is look at that suffix and say, oh, that suffix means X. And then you go to the front of the word. Now, in some cases, it's not going to be a compound word. Imagine, if you will, at the top, the word osteo wasn't there, and you just saw itis and Arthur. It wouldn't change your methodology. You would simply have 2 steps instead of 3 steps. So if you saw the word arthritis, the first thing you would do is define itis, which is a suffix, then you would define Arthur, which means joint. So if you just looked at those 2 components, you would have arthritis, inflammation of the joint. In this case, we have a compound word to kind of show you how it all comes together. So once again, if you look at this literally, osteoarthritis, and if you follow the numbered sequence at the top of the page, You define 1 first, then we go to 2, then we go to 3, and if you follow straight down that left-hand column, you see osteoarthritis, inflammation of the bone and joint. And that's everything you need to know about the grammar for medical terminology. So at this point, we're going to cut it off. I want you to go ahead and review this material that we just covered in these short lectures here, and make sure you have a good fundamental understanding of these word building rules, because they're going to be very, very important to you in terms of how you can put things together, as I said before. So work with this material. You have a study table I've provided for you that you can use to take notes with. If you want to review the material and use that, you can take notes your own way, however you want to go about taking notes. And there's going to be a worksheet also that accompanies this where you'll be able to practice some of these ideas. So I want you to work with those materials. Get these word building rules, get these word building rules down and know them pretty well before we move on. The next thing I'm going to do is jump in and give you a whole lot of prefixes. And what I'm going to do is just read the list off to you. So I'll let you know the next portion of this lecture is going to be what we call a data dump, or that's what I call a data dump. And it means I'm simply going to give you a long list of prefixes and their definitions, and I'm going to ask you to memorize them. Don't lose hope on this. I know the first couple lectures are going to be about grammar, and this is not the exciting stuff. But when we get to chapter 2, which we will next week, we're going to jump right into medical terminology by discussing body planes and how it applies to radiology. And then once we get to that point, then we're going to start breaking down the body systems, and we're going to start learning actual medical terms, the disease states associated with them, and the words to describe them. So we are going to get to the real medical stuff, but before we get there, we have to learn all the rules. And I'm even going to teach you a few things about how you can break the rules and still make it all work. Okay? And in case you're wondering, that picture in the upper right corner of the frame, that is someone with osteoarthritis, very advanced osteoarthritis. It is a painful condition and one we hope we never have to deal with. Okay, that's all for right now. When I come back, I'm going to be giving you the data dump I promised you, and you'll be learning a whole lot of prefixes. So get these word rules down. And I'll be back with you shortly, and we'll start in on getting our first set of prefixes memorized.